Hi, in this video I'm going to try to share a method for learning to love the bard. It's a method about close reading. So in order to appreciate Shakespeare or any of his plays, in this case Macbeth, it is extremely important that we learn how to do a close reading of the play, and in particular, quoting Emma Smith here, read the important bits first. Study the important bits first. So when you are trying to appreciate a play such as Macbeth, a good thing to do, of course, would be to start with some of the key soliloquies and to understand them by doing a close reading. I recommend that you first listen to it. You could watch, for example, a YouTube video, read it quickly, make sure you have your notes available and that you can define any obscure words that you don't know, and then it's time to really understand it by doing a close reading of the play, and that's what I'm going to try to share with you today. Now, you could pick any of the important soliloquies to start, but one of the places that I would like to start would be Act 1, Scene 5, when Lady Macbeth is introduced to the audience. As you are aware, she comes onto the stage and she's reading a letter from her husband. Then she goes into a soliloquy. The first part of the soliloquy is usually called The Milk of Human Kindness, and she worries about her husband not having enough guts, enough courage to do the deed. And then she's interrupted by a messenger who tells her the king is coming tonight, and then she goes into the second part of the soliloquy, which is Unsex Me Here. This is obviously a very important and critical part of the play, so my suggestion to you when you're trying to understand Macbeth is that you really dig deeply and do a close reading and annotate these important sections of the play. So let me just try to help you go through that process. And what we're really trying to do here is closely read the text and understand exactly what the passage means. So I'm going to start with the passage, the first 14 lines of Act 1, Scene 5, where she's reading her husband's letter. I should point out that this is in prose. This is one of the easier passages from Lady Macbeth to decode, but it's important, and of course we'll see why. All right, so let's get right into it. Okay, so here we are. We're at Inverness, which is Macbeth's castle, and you'll see that when she enters, she's entering reading the letter, and she's already halfway through the letter. We can see that because she's reading, "They met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report they have more in them than mortal knowledge." So the day of success, of course, was his successful day on the battlefield, where he unseamed MacDonald from the nave to the chops, and his brandished steel was smoked with bloody execution. He's just killed all the enemies of King Duncan. He's become successful. He's won the battle, and of course we know that he's been made Thane of Cawdor, right? And so obviously he's reporting now to his wife about "they met me, they are the weird sisters, the witches," okay? And they have more in them than mortal knowledge. Mortal to me means human, although some people argue that it might mean murdering or having to do with death. And we'll see later that there's a good reason for that. But it's clear that these witches have more in them than mortal knowledge because they're superhuman. They have these superhuman powers, first of which is they can see the future. They can predict the future, and he has evidence of that. So he goes on, "When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air into which they vanished." So burning desire here, there's a hellish premonition here, as you can see, because he's eventually going to burn in hell because of his desire to be king. Is there some sexual desire there as well? Well, you might be stretching it if you say there is, but there are scholars who have argued that as well. Whilst I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, of course, is the wonder of these witches who have made this prediction and then just disappeared. They appeared to be not inhabitants of this earth. And while I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, wrapped means that he's completely obsessed by it. He's inattentive to everything else. Came missives from the king who all hailed me, Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me and referred me to the coming on of time, with Hail King that shalt be. So these missives are, of course, the messengers and the messages from the king, the principal message of which, of course, is you are now Thane of Cawdor, which the witches had predicted he will be. So now he knows that the witches can predict the future. And these weird sisters have also referred me to the coming on of time. That means they've referred him to the future. With Hail King that shalt be. Notice that there's a lot of time references in this passage, in this letter, that there's a lot of thinking about the future. They become obsessed with the future. Macbeth first and now Lady Macbeth are kind of becoming wrapped or obsessed with this idea that in the near future they will be king and queen. This have I thought good to deliver thee. Thought good, of course, means he's thought hard about these things. He's been dwelling on this. He's thinking about nothing else. He's obsessed with this idea. My dearest partner of greatness, we can see that she is his dearest partner of greatness and the one in the family who wears the pants in the family. It's her castle. It's her battlements. He can't go forward until he gets permission from her, until he shares with her his idea about killing the king. That thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing. In other words, he owes it to her. He owes her these dues by being ignorant of what greatness is repeated there, is promised thee. Obviously, the greatness that is promised thee is the weird sisters have told him, king that shalt be. That means that the greatness promised to Lady Macbeth is queen that shalt be. Lay it to thy heart means keep it secret. Of course she will, and farewell. So what have we seen here? We've seen that, interestingly, this letter, which is in prose. So Lady Macbeth, one of the most important characters, after 14 lines, has not yet uttered one original word of her own. She's only been reading this letter from her husband, and this letter in prose is a summary of the first 4 scenes. If you look at it, what is he described here? The first 4 scenes, what's happened? Well, you had this battle where he had his day of success. Then you had these weird sisters, these witches, and they've made these 3 prophecies, okay? Interestingly, Macbeth has been sending this letter, or perhaps these letters, we will find out later, and now he's rushing, following up on the letter, and he appears at the castle at Inverness just after she reads this letter. So he's really, really eager to share this information with his wife. Okay, so, what do we see in this scene? We see that that Lady Macbeth has been established as an important character. She is the queen of her castle, or as we will find out later, her battlements. She is that, by the way, battlements is something, a literary device or a poetic device called a synecdoche. A synecdoche is when you use part of something to describe the whole thing, such as referring to your car as my wheels. And usually you use the part of something that is an important part that highlights one particular feature of the thing you're describing. So the battlements are those pointy things at the top of the castle from which archers shoot their arrows at attacking armies. And the battlements are an important part of the castle because, of course, they signify battle, bloodshed. And of course, we're going to see bloodshed in Macbeth's castle. All right, so she's the queen of the battlements, and she's the close confidant of her husband, perhaps even his boss. Shakespeare, the author, establishes this by using this letter. Macbeth cannot even mention what he is thinking in the letter, of course, without first seeking her permission. He sees the approaching greatness, that they are going to become king and queen, but he needs his wife's support, her confederacy, to achieve the greatness. He needs a co-conspirator and a muse. Macbeth is emotionally disturbed, which Shakespeare often uses prose for a character that's emotionally disturbed. We're going to see this later when Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking, and he cannot formulate a plan, nor can he do thus which thou must do, obviously the killing of the king, without his wife. He needs to use the valor of her tongue to erase his doubts and fears, and she will instruct him about how to kill Duncan.